I usually sit halfway up the Kop at Princeton Park, where you get quite a good view. I like sitting behind the goal. I think I've heard some of your pods, Matt, where you've talked about like the difference between side. I think you sit on in the main stand here. Different people kind of prefer the different viewpoints, but I've always enjoyed being behind the goal. I've felt it can give a real sense of flow and shape. But what you don't get sitting there is that real pitch side awareness of what it's what it's actually like for those players and what they're saying to each other, and being in such a tiny little non-league attempt of a ground as the Peninsula Stadium is. We were right, I don't know, a couple of feet above pitch level, I suppose, right behind the goal, very, very kind of tight environment. And you could really see how unsettled and unhappy that backline were. The number of times players were screaming mainly at Turnbull, I'll be honest. Him and Murphy had a few slanging matches. Murphy was very, very unhappy with what was happening in front of him. And particularly in that first half, you could see Turnbull was either not playing the offside line everybody else was, in terms of actually being too high and then having to chase back, or getting done out wide, or not being quite right positionally. A few times O'Connor was coming across into that space, and I thought Norman's positioning was really poor as well. We also exacerbated that by trying too many times to pass the ball out from the back from Murphy to O'Connor, who's then getting closed. The ball was being given away. A few times O'Connor was just screaming in frustration at no one in particular. You could see how really worked up he was by it. And at the end, he was still clearly feeling and suffering from it. You could see when he was clapping the fans that he was still dwelling on the frustration of that performance. And that's worrying to see, really. It didn't look a happy group of players. It didn't look like a group of players who were really confident in what each other was going to do. And I was also a little surprised. I didn't see much talking from either Smallwood or Smith, which I'd kind of expected that would be one of the real positives of those two players coming in. It felt like if anyone was trying to organise and talk to each other, it was mainly Murphy and O'Connor. And there was at one point when Joe Ironside ran right back into our own penalty area to start telling the defence what they should be doing. It was quite something to see. I don't know who's necessarily to blame or at fault for that. And I think Turnbull's had some good performances for us, but we all know that he has that shocker of a performance in him, and it felt like today was that one. And it felt a matter of time before he did the inevitable and gave away an unnecessary penalty. It was also interesting to hear that he was the player that was interviewed by Merseyside at the end of the game, and didn't really offer anything in the way of apology for his performance. He's kind of said he had no complaints over the penalty and hadn't meant to do it, but he can see why it would be given, and was kind of saying the fans, at the end, applauding because they were proud of the team, but the team didn't really feel they deserved it. I don't think the players were applauding because they were proud of the team. I think the fans, we were just showing that no matter how bad that team is in front of us, we'll back the club, we'll back our side. But I don't think anyone was singing Super White Army anything more than out of triumph over adversity, in terms of we won't be shouted down just because the performance is poor. So I hope he wasn't taking that away thinking that we were all really pleased with what we saw on the pitch today. But it's like I say, I think probably that is maybe one of the reasons why Crosby decided to try and not move more than he felt he needed to. But I think it did hamper us. I think Blacker was a gamble that failed, and I don't think really, I can't see how you can play Brough and Norman and have enough of the legs to stretch, because we've got other areas where we just don't have those legs. Smallwood doesn't have legs. I'm not convinced.
He does actually have legs.
No, he does have two legs. He has human legs. But yes, that's a fair point. But not in a way that's going to get you up and down a pitch at any particular rate of speed. And I'm a bit worried about the number 10 pairing as well. I think at home sometimes Whittaker and Patrick can look really good together, but I don't know. We're missing a Hendry type role massively. I think someone who can link up that midfield with the attack. I don't think either of them are really that player. Both want to be a number 10, and I think sometimes the beauty of Hendry was he was almost more of a box to box type player playing in that role, and that really helped us. I think when we tried last season to play to drop him deeper, it didn't really work, and sometimes we tried to play Hawks and Morris and things like that. It didn't really in that 10. Maybe Connor Jennings is your best hope of that. Again, I thought when he came on, he did start to knit things together better, and even after getting very nasty clattering, which is a shame because I think it did affect him. But I wouldn't be surprised if longer term we start to see Joseph really competing with Norman for that starting place, because like I say, I was really impressed with him, and impressed with him, in a tough physical environment as well, away from home when the rest of the team were being dominated. He really was a bright spark. So that's something, I suppose.